we have Republican control of the judiciary. A Republican president just been elected 2 years earlier, and a conservative wave that was sort of a response to 8 years of, in fact, a Democratic president. But lightning struck in the midterm elections, a Democratic candidate wave, coupled with a split in Republican leadership, showed that, in fact, the president's approval could be faltering. That led to major changes in congressional elections. Democrats made significant goals in the House, and even though Republicans lost a record number of seats in the Senate, they still managed to barely hold on to a very slim majority. It sounds like where we are, but the political historian in me would have to mention that, in fact, that was 1922. So what we're seeing here in 2018 is very much an echo of what our country was going through almost 100 years ago. And so with that in mind, I'd like to open it up to the panel, and let's all have a few words about what we think we've seen. And then we'll dialogue, and we'll exchange, and we'll analyze. Dr. Braley?
So I'm a bit under the weather, but I'm not. I think, well, what we've seen is a blue wave, but a blue wave that has not consistently, I guess, impact some of the same the areas across the nation. I think that we have seen that both urban and suburban, as well as rural areas, have presented patterns that still suggest that we have a great divide in our nation. And I think that it is worth looking at some of the models and strategies that have went forward to be able to actually identify what actually are the components of that blue wave, because I think that may be one of the missing components and one of the gaps that we can misperceive how you can have a tsunami in certain areas, a blue wave in certain areas, and no wave effect in other areas.
So I guess I want to frame the conversation this way for this evening. I think you see this, where minorities turn out and you hold some whites, Democrats win. Where you don't have a candidate that can turn out young people and minorities, it's hard for Democrats to win. You also have this, the Democratic Party is victorious without a lot of infrastructure and without a lot of belief, because there were a lot of candidates that ran for office that did not have the support in Texas of the state party or the local party, but they won. And you're going to have the same thing nationally. And this is a conversation I want to touch on as we go. There's still an argument over the impact of gerrymandering, but in the last 2 election cycles, you've seen that when the voters decide to show up and show out, whether they are Democrats, Republicans, or swing independents, they could pick candidates inconsistent with what you perceive the district to be. So in Texas, I thought it was a great night for the Democratic Party, notwithstanding the Democratic Party, and it was a great statewide effort, but the reality is when even Beto O'Rourke loses white voters in Texas, you've really got to start thinking about what the model and strategy is to win Texas. And the good thing is in 2 years, you get a lot more minorities who have gotten to 18 and have moved up the age scale. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so let's just sort of do a quick overview. It was most definitely a blue wave, a blue tsunami, however you want to describe it nationally. Democrats picked up a 35, 36 and counting in terms of it in the U.S. House. Obviously, here too in Texas, on a per-share vote basis, because one of the issues to think about is Carol referenced gerrymandering. If you locked out the lines, the numbers likely would have been much more along the line, closer to about 45 to 50. In terms of the percentage basis, total votes cast, this is on par with 2010 and 1994. This was a massive wave. It was mitigated by the gerrymandering, redistricting effects that took place in 2010. Here in Texas, Carol's point about the lack of statewide infrastructure is the result of just basically a generation of non-competitive statewide races. We've had essentially a singular competitive race that we've had since 2002. Which was the last time we had one, and that was this cycle. We definitely had a blue wave in Texas. That wave would have been significantly smaller, but was enhanced almost entirely by a singular candidate, Beto O'Rourke. I would argue, the analogy that I like to give to what happened in Texas is Beto O'Rourke was LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. He could get you to the championship game, but he couldn't win, okay? Because the reality is a whole bunch of Democrats won in large part because of that differential. Here locally, he won CD7, the Congressional District 7 race that Lizzie Panel Fletcher won by about 18,000 votes. She won it by 12. He won Harris County by over 200,000 votes. That is the biggest vote share that we've ever had. Bigger than Obama, bigger than Clinton. The average Democrat won by about 110,000 votes. Our new county judge, Lena Hidalgo, won it by about 18,000 votes. In Fort Bend County, he won it by over 10 points. They flipped every district in there. He won 18 of the 20 major metropolitan areas. Tarrant County, he won the district for the first time in a generation. He cut the margins in every single of the 224 districts that he didn't win during midterm elections by as much as 20 to 30%. It was a massive showing by a singular candidate. Now, two things to unpack there. One, as important as his success was, the ability to bring other people in was even more impressive. Other candidates who had support and had the structure did extremely well. So when you can look at situations, Dallas County essentially became as deep blue as you can imagine. They only have a singular seat left in their entire delegation now that is not Democratic. They had a fantastic congressional candidate in Colin Allred, who essentially, that race was, that was supposed to be a close race. It was over by the end of early vote. And he essentially lifted up. So where there was more than one, where O'Rourke had a partner, it worked really, really well. Other races, there were 8 or 9 competitive congressional races where you had a situation where races that were not even thought to be competitive, he ended up being within 5 to 6 points. Statewide, there's essentially very little money spent at the statewide level. Justin Nelson, the Attorney General candidate, was the only other candidate who was on statewide television. Even with that circumstance, in some cases being outspent 20 to 1, the Democratic candidate was within 5 to 6 points. It had not happened. It was the best Democratic performance in about 40 years.
You brought up some outstanding points, and certainly I'm a numbers person, and in this case, you don't have to be a numbers person to see that we had phenomenal amount of turnout. So as I'm just going to throw out breadcrumbs on the water, feel free to follow me, or if you see me heading toward a swirling eddy, go ahead and let me go. But let's talk about the difference in the turnout. We've seen traditional midterm turnouts and rates from as low as 34 to 36% traditionally, and this time we capped 49% turnout, which for midterm is pretty astoundingly high, actually, tracking, and that went across pretty much nationwide and certainly in our urban centers. Tell us a little bit about the turnout in the sense of what was I think, almost pejoratively called the youth vote, but voters 18 to 29 usually vote 15 to 20% less. Can you talk a little bit about the Beto effect? And I can say, certainly, since I've been teaching, I started teaching under the President Obama administration, and my students were as engaged and enlightened and empowered, and generally moved by Beto as they were candidates that a candidate that more closely matched their own ethnic demographic. So can we talk a little bit about the Beto effect? What does it mean sociologically? What could it mean in terms of community outreach? And what does it mean? How did that drive the numbers in again, in your opinion? Go ahead.
Oh, we're going
Dr.
in order.
Brantley.
I think what we saw with Beto, he really did do a lot to reach out, primarily, I think, to millennials. But he also did something that I believe to be very important for millennials. They do not necessarily appreciate being categorized.
Absolutely.
So I think he really did try to meet them where they were, to the point of doing the college tours, and not just the college tours, but even joining efforts with local community leaders or local artists in order to meet them where they were. On the trail, I recall we were riding. It was the day of the election. And as we were riding, someone in the van said, "Hey, look up! There are people with Beto shirts on in the you can see them in their homes." And so, just in that ride, I think we passed 3 campaign pop-up homes, and so people they really felt the Beto effect. Like, it made them feel like they could be a part of something that they had not been a part of. The sociology in me, also in just standing in, while we were standing in lines, just talking to various voters, I talked to several people. Primarily, it was more than a few white males that told me that in the past they have generally voted as Republicans. Their first time voting for a Democrat was during the election of Obama, and they voted for Obama. But this was the first time that they felt the need to vote straight ticket. And so, this is not across the board, so I can't make a generalization in that. But I think, his, and I'm not sure, and Jay, that's something that we could definitely talk about in terms of, was that the most effective model in terms of being able to have that crossover effect. But I do think that he tapped into a group of people, particularly millennials, that had not been tapped before. So I thought that was very important in his election.
So a long time ago, in another lifetime, I was running for an office, actually running unopposed. This was an organizational office, and somebody served on the board with me. And we end up at the convention, and there's somebody that's running against me as a write-in candidate, Councilman Bradford. And she ends up with the person's sticker on. So I track the lady down, and I say, "Hey, what's going on?" And I'm giving the song and the dance. And she says, "You're absolutely right. You're better qualified, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but you never asked me for my vote." And the thing that I saw, first off, was you had a bunch of Democrats on the ballot running for offices. If Beto was on the ballot by himself without people down ballot, nobody thought Democrats were going to get close to taking the State House. But a bunch of people were motivated by their anxiety, their disappointment in Trump, and they decided to get up and go make a difference. And that's the energy that was out there. It just so happened that you also had Beto on the ticket, and he was a beneficiary of energy that was already out there looking for an outlet, and he went and asked people for their votes. Whatever the next group of young people are called, it's the same thing. My son is 21 years old. I first saw it with Obama. If a candidate goes and includes and asks voters for their vote, you started this round with this observation about the 22 election and superimposed it on the now. If you believe that the people who voted for Obama and went over to Trump are gone forever, you're in really big trouble unless you are going to drive a new pool of people to the vote. And what you saw about 6 years ago, the pool of fourth graders in America became majority minority.
Right.
And what you're having out there is a phenomenon where the voter pool is going through the same kind of transition. And notwithstanding that one person at the poll, the data tells us that Beto O'Rourke lost white voters overwhelmingly, because if he had won more white voters, white men or white women, he lost 50-something% of white women, 71% of white men. That means that the Democratic brand in Texas with white voters is horrendous, or it's not so bad if you run way over to the right and maybe you can get some, but I'm not sure that's the reality, that you can run way to the right to try to get white voters when the newest pool of voters are telling you they want a different kind of politics, they want a different kind of government, and they want a government that's more inclusive, respectful, and responsive to the needs and challenges that they're facing. And so I think if the Democratic Party starts with a different kind of expectation for 2019, the 2020 cycle, not just at the presidential level, you can see the same kind of thing. We're talking about a record turnout, and we didn't match the 26 presidential turnout level. We had a record turnout for a midterm. I'll end with this last observation. I think we all have to give up this notion that there are models against which we can model what's going to happen coming forward, because everything we have known about politics is being proven to be false. So we start with, this is what the midterm model looks like, and it gets blown out the water in 2016 when you pick up races all across the country in Virginia and places like that, where in districts that allegedly were drawn for Republicans, Democrats get elected, you elect LGBTQ members. Arizona, you elect the LGBTQ United States Senator. I just don't think you can start the analysis anymore with this as the model and what are we thinking is going to happen. You got to come to this with a brand new experience. I'll close with this. Look at Lena Hidalgo. Nobody thought she could win. She didn't go ask anybody's permission to get in. The Democratic Party of Harris County didn't support her getting in the race. But she had a belief that it was time for a change and that the community deserved a different kind of county judge. And I think without Beto O'Rourke, she still, it may have been a lot closer, but she probably still would have been elected county judge.
Yeah, I'll respond to some of that. Yeah,
I wanted you to.
You wanted me to. Yeah, I'll sort of do them backwards. Yeah, I just, the numbers just simply don't bear that out. I like Lena, and I think she will be a fine county judge, but the numbers just simply don't support that. That the notion of not having a sort of incredible turnout driven by your singular at-large candidate or your singular statewide candidate. It's almost impossible to imagine a scenario by which she would have, just if you just had the base wave election. That's all I'm saying, just based on that. Now, couple of things. You're absolutely right about the reality of what the Democratic electorate looks like in Texas, or frankly, in most of the South. It's essentially a minority party. By that I mean ethnically speaking, right? It's African American, Hispanic, Asian American, and LGBT, and some progressive whites, and even among them, it's disproportionately single white women. What we're seeing now is a national movement among suburban voters, where you're seeing suburban women moving from the Republican column to the independent column, and in this cycle, moving to the Democratic column. Whether that's a long-term trend, we will see if that happens. But there's no way, and any candidate can win if they're trying to, at least any Democratic candidate can win if they're trying to rely essentially on white people to get them in the office, because just the numbers simply don't bear that out. It's not possible. Now, the axiom, I will say this, the couple of interesting takeaways from this. The axiom in politics has been that if you can create a predictive model based on race and income. and geography to some extent. You can predict to some extent what people's tendencies are to vote. The third one now is increasingly becoming college education. What we're seeing is that that the only growth area for Republicans in the last two cycles has essentially been non-college educated white men. And every other area has been trending Democratic. Or at least that's what the initial last two cycles have shown. If you look at states like Ohio, Ohio's getting redder. Large part because it has one of the highest concentrations of Anglo non-college educated men. States like Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado is the best example of this. Colorado is aggressively trending blue because it has such a high percentage of college educated voters. Texas is the future in the sense that the southwest part of Texas is the future. Georgia, one of the reasons Georgia is competitive in large part because it has a large college-educated voting base now. Florida, Democrats can't seem to figure out how to win there. If your name's not Barack Obama, you don't win, essentially. That's what's happened for them in at least the last 10 years. So that's a much more complicated issue, but these sort of structural trends you see, I think, are going to be the politics we see. So I disagree a little bit that we can't kind of tell what it's going to look like. We know that you need to have broad-reaching candidates that are able to sort of bridge gaps and reach out. We know that races matter. Having people in races matter. Howard Dean back in 2004 talked about the 50-state solution, running people everywhere. You lose a bunch of races, but the cumulative incremental effect will be great, and you can win races. That's a lot of what we saw this cycle. We didn't even talk about this. The legislature, Democrats picked up 12 seats. They were projected to pick up 5. There were seats that that look like they were not competitive that Democrats won. There are 9 more seats that are likely to flip in the 2020 election. If the existing trends continue, it's very likely you have a Democratic speaker going into going into a redistricting session in 21-22. So we've got a lot of interesting things that happened. This was, whether or not this was a sort of fundamental realignment election, I think we'll find out. But we've just never had a midterm election with this kind of interest in turnout. Some of that is because of the president and his historic unpopularity. But what I would agree with Kroll is this: there's a tendency in politics to look at the last election and look at sort of what has been done. And that's one of the reasons why this argument about focusing on the industrial Midwest, I think, is a loser argument. People are moving out of there in droves. The future of the country is in Texas, is from California to Texas and everything in between. It's Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. Those are the growth states. And in the South, it's still just Florida and Georgia. That's where it is. And I'll leave it with this. Beto O'Rourke showed that you can be competitive in Texas. You can say what you want about Ted Cruz. He ran a strong race. He spent a lot of money. Other than Greg Abbott, he's the most popular statewide Republican official. He was going into this race. He's more popular than John Cornyn. People don't really realize that. If Texas can be won by a Democrat, then we don't have a presidential election anymore because essentially it's over. So this idea, while it seems far-fetched about O'Rourke running for president, if he had a plausible chance right now of beating Donald Trump in Texas, we don't have a presidential election anymore.
Some excellent points. A couple of things I'd like to sort of touch on. When we think about the generational effect, I teach a large number of, as we would say, early millennials. They are 19, 20, 22, and you have to imagine a 19-year-old freshman or sophomore here, certainly at Texas Southern, had a African-American president for nearly half their life. They have a whole different perspective, even though that was an election they weren't particularly involved in. Now, what I find is, I hear, why weren't you engaged in 2016? there was nothing they felt to engage them in. There's a great gap, and I've certainly heard this from my students, from students at Rice and from students at U of H as well. They felt that there was a great gap in terms of who was talking to them. So I certainly credit Beto with saying that that's important. A secondary thing is that we did a lunchtime, my students and I did a lunchtime stroll to the polls. I think I've got 1 or 2 students that were here where we did that. And we literally walked over to the polling place. That is not unfortunately, the polling place for a large number of the people who live in the dorm. And my students asked some really pointed questions about the voting process, because we have a group of students that this was their first election. We also need to address the fact that I often say the United States does a very poor job of teaching its citizens to be citizens. We don't really give you a lot of information. The average person gets more information about how to take a driver's test than they do about how to be a citizen. We're not really good at it, I think, comparatively. So to that end, it was very interesting to see them interact. Are we looking at the fact that when in fact someone says, hey, give me your vote, let me come and talk to you, that there are a group of people that respond, even the group that's labeled as a low turnout group? And I certainly saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of engagement. I mentioned some of the excitement about Beto, but a lot of that was based on the fact that they're a touchy-feely group of people. They literally like to know who people are. I was very comfortable with the distance from candidates. There's a group of students now coming up that want more direct activism. They want someone to talk to them. They want someone to ask them for their vote. And I think that if anything, hopefully a lot of my students express concern about being written off. Well, young people don't vote, so we shouldn't talk to them. Then where do we get our next generation from? And with that, I'd like to ask my next leading Beaumont, if it were, about who are our next generation of candidates? Where are we going? And I picked up again, just a brief profile. In a rather heated midterm election, the New York Times advised that an outspokenly liberal black member coming out of the state legislature said, and I quote, "I am not going to be a quiet button pusher in Congress." So after winning the Democratic primary runoff, George Mickey Leland was elected to succeed Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who decided not to run again after holding the 18th Congressional District seat for 8 years. How do we get a next generation of candidates? You know, I tell my students often that politics is like the lotto. If you're not in it, you're not going to win it. So where do we reach out and get new candidates from? I would like to think, honestly, that the Lena situation was a bit of an outlier. I don't think I see a scenario with her winning without the Beto effect. That's my take on it. That's me in the cheap seats, as it were, in the bleachers. But calling that one as balls and strikes, I can see the wave. I don't see it being enough of a wave to carry that candidate. When we talk about candidate valence and candidate quality, she's a great, enthusiastic candidate. But in a scenario without Beto, I'm not sure if I see it. But where are the next Lenas coming from? Where are the next generation, whatever gender, whatever color, whatever, where are they coming from? And I'll go ahead, listen, and start with Dr. Braley, if you'd like, or if you want to pun it.
Carol was about to speak, so it's fine.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't want to harp on the Lena thing, but the analysis...
No offense to Lena.
Yeah, but let me say this. The exact analysis that's happening here is why a bunch of people, like a former mayor and others, didn't get in, because they were making an analysis on what they thought would happen. But let's deal with the reality. Harris County had trended Democratic. If you had watched special elections across the country, coming into 2018, you saw districts where Trump won by double digits that had come within inches of being Democratic. So you could see, I call it a mood. Jay and I were talking, and I say, for me, political science is almost like alchemy. It's more art than science. And a lot of people focus on the science. What I saw was a woman, and women outvote man. What I saw was a candidate with a Hispanic surname. That means in most instances on racial bloc voting, Republican Hispanics would cross over and vote for her. I saw a candidate that was a Democrat, and you were going to have a strong Democratic turnout because she just so happened to be on the ballot with 19 black women running for judges, and there was going to be a group of black voters who were conscious and wanted to make sure they got some black folk in the judiciary because we were having a big fight over bail reform. We still, because even though we don't talk about it a lot, I'm the father of a 21-year-old, and I know there's a whole lot of black parents, black sisters, brothers, aunts, and uncle who worry every time one of their millennial goes out the door. And so they were going to go out there to cast a ballot to talk not only to Trump, but to folks to make sure that there was a different kind of mood. And it started last cycle when they elected a quote-unquote progressive district attorney. They want change. And so it wouldn't have mattered if she won by one vote. She would have been the county attorney. She would have been a county judge.
Sure.
So everybody that thinks Harris County went blue, does it matter that the Democratic judges won by 100,000 and Beto won by 200,000? Let's factor in different election, you have different fall off. People don't go down all the way down the ballot. You also have a different base turnout. The turnout is changing. She probably would have still won. We won't know, but all we know is she got in and she won. Here's the disappointment. There were not enough people encouraging young African American candidates to get on the ballot. There were not enough people trying to help the African American candidates get through the primary process and executive offices in the county. And so we ended up in the general election with judicial candidates only, and it was a fight to get the black judicial candidates through the primary process because there were people in the party establishment that were opposed to black candidates running for certain office in the judiciary. So my position is get in. Now all the rest of us have got to go help them. We have an outstanding group of young African-American candidates out there that ran in the JP race. Those folks need to be lifted up and encouraged into other office. We will have a group of people who will come out of the District B race next year in the city election who will not win. They need to be lifted up and encouraged to run. We have a group of young people out there running for leadership in the NAACP. Win or lose, they need to be lifted up and encouraged to run not just for organizational office, but for public office. We've got a young sister on the Houston City Council. She ought to be lifted up and encouraged to run for comptroller or mayor. All you have to do is encourage people to get out there and vote, and they are looking for what I call authentic leaders. They aren't trying to be with you because they think you're going to win. The millennials are with you because they believe you believe in what you're saying and what you intend to do. And that's a dynamic and differential shift. Most people are trying to calculate whether they should be with you because they think you may win. These kids are voting for you because they believe you believe. And if you believe and the voter believes, Cabal, listen, I didn't know who the hell Beto O'Rourke was. He was some congressman from a media market outside of Harris County. I couldn't tell you on any polling data, on any model, that Beto O'Rourke would turn into Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, a Democrat with magnetism, where people started saying he was like John and Bobby Kennedy. Now somebody show me the model that projected that, and I will heat the hat in my jacket pocket. Nobody in this state and no national pollster could have tell you that was going to happen. What young voters saw wasn't the guy that was coming to their campus. He just so happened to be a guy coming to their campus, but they saw a guy who believed what he was saying and was talking to them authentically. And I forget what it was, but on the day the viral video went live about him talking about the football players kneeling, I knew it was magic in a bottle. Because normally you don't have a Democrat talking like that in an environment where black folks are being bashed and black mamas are being called biatches. And here was a guy willing to stand up. He brought a different kind of mood to the race in Texas. Can he bring it to a national race? I don't know. I think it's tough, but I'll say this. Hey, I'm from Texas, but my first preference for the 2020 cycle is a black woman should be on the ticket. If everybody's running around the country talking about black women are the backbone, Beto O'Rourke lost in Texas. Stacey Abrams is still in the runoff. I don't even hear black folk talking about Stacey Abrams. I thought Gillum was a dynamic, outstanding guy. If he'd have won down in Florida, would people be talking about him as a presidential candidate? I think part of this responsibility is we've got to start having a different psychological conversation. Then you put the science and numbers on it. But first start with a change in mood. And I think the mood in this country has changed. Jay pointed out, we won 12 seats in the State House. Nobody, not even the Texas Democratic Party, was trying to retake the State House. They ain't even believe it. They got lucky because these candidates got up and ran. Now they're talking about, oh, we got these many Senate seats that we can likely take. The reason they can do that analysis is because a Democratic candidate ran for state Senate and came close. But if that person hadn't ran, Beto's margin wouldn't have been as high, and we wouldn't be sitting here all over the place in the state now saying, oh my God, there's like 5 Senate seats we can pick up. Oh my God, there's 9 other seats. When Eric Johnson announced for Speaker, not even most Democrats in the legislature was thinking, let's elect us a Democratic Speaker. They were like, why is this guy out here embarrassing himself and embarrassing us and trying to put us in an awkward position like we Democrats can elect a Speaker? Well, guess what? Now they all running around looking in the mirror thinking they should be the next Speaker of the House in 2021. And that's a good thing, but I'm not sure they should be the next Speaker because they didn't have the confidence to believe we could take it. I'm sure this is not a political event, this is a political science event with a sociologist, but I know there are people here high up in the Democratic Party officialdom, so I'm sure they now are going to develop a plan and not just leave all these candidates out there by themselves this cycle. I was on a conference call last night. There were people running across the state. We talk about rural and urban. There were Democrats running in rural places in this state that so happen to look like me, and the county party would not support them for county commissioners. Now everybody's talking about all the county commissioner courts we took over. I'm counting on the Democratic Party to do a better job, but I'm committed to helping folks that want to go out there and run. Hey, most of the support for the black judicial candidates in Harris County came from the Black Women PAC, a PAC that's less than a year old, that was founded to go independently help fund black women be elected to public office. I mean, I take great pride in the fact that from Harris County, we elected an African-American woman vice chair of the state party. We elected a young African-American millennial vice chair of finance of the state party. So there are candidates out there. I'd like to see one of those people lead the party. I'd like to see one of those people get elected to the United States Senate. I mean, I think it can be done, but I believe.
All right, so let me try to unpack some of what Curl said.
Help me elect a black person to the Senate. Go on and do that one first.
I mean, we can just go down the list of people. I think Colin Allred certainly would be an interesting candidate in a couple of years to run for U.S. Senate. Yeah, there's just a couple. I mean, what I would say on this is I think as far as developing a farm team and getting quality candidates, you obviously want to create an environment. Those, you had a lot of people running for state rep seats and county commissioner seats. Part of that was because you had active county parties recruiting people. I mean, it would be we talk about a lot is being made, and I think rightly so, about the 19 African American women who were on there. A lot of them were recruited to come out and run by people in the Democratic Party locally. So I think let's not say that no one was involved. And that
I'm
was
sure Carla's going to clean up.
no. I mean, I'm just saying because I know some people who were involved in that, and I certainly consider myself being part of that. So I know some of them who have, not all of them. But look, African American women in Democratic primary are gold. They're almost unbeatable, which is the advice I tell people all the time. And so it's no mistake. Now, that said, we need to accept certain realities about what happened in Harris County. I know you don't like to talk about numbers. We did not, and I'll use the word we, African American voters as a whole, did not have the kind of percentage growth that they should have had in this cycle. Latino voters did not perform in Harris County the way they should have in this cycle. 65% of the vote among Hispanic voters is not in the urban core. It's not even on the East End. Adrian Garcia won in CC2, not ironically because of gentrification, because you had a lot of young millennials moving out into the East End. It's no longer Second Ward, it's Edo, apparently, much like Fourth Ward is Midtown now. So it's changed the dynamic there. So I guess the one thing I would say is it's important. The outcomes we had were great, but we need to, if you unpack some of the numbers, we need to be that. Now, why? I think I would totally agree with you. And he and I had this conversation, and I have nothing but respect for some of the people who ran for county-wide administrative positions, but we essentially had almost like, I think we had almost the Marilyn Burgess, Diane Troutman. I don't know that we had any diversity among the administrative and senior administrative people running for administrative positions. We should have. You did not have a singular figure that got people out. Right. On this campus, when we've had this survey before, I'm not even sure every student knew there were 19 African American women running for judge.
My classes knew. I'm going to go ahead and put it out there.
Your students did.
Put it out for my students.
Well, mine did too, because I told them, but it was always a source of information.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying the data doesn't really support that, the notion.
But Jay, I think that's why it's important.
Now we're going. Go ahead. I said, now we're popping.
Just like a roll. I think, to go back to the initial question, and I want to really get back to the 19 women. I think particular millennials are looking for authenticity, and they're looking for change. And whether we, believe or not, Beto was going to bring some change, he presented himself as that figure. And also, people in general are looking for governance. They just want governance. Now, in terms of the 19 women that ran, I think I beg to differ that they were recruited. Now, that's not to say across the board that some of them were not recruited and some of them did not have relationships. I think, even connecting to a statement, I believe Carola and I discussed this, was it a Beto effect or a blue effect? And I think it's worth discussing that, because in both models or in both analysis, you have to take a close look at not only the black vote, but you have to look at civic engagement and how did we engage the black community. This is it's a lot of complexity here, because not only were the county parties working, but also people on the ground were working. Those 19 women, they worked. They were determined to get their information out, who they were, and because of their determination and work ethic, people bought into that. But I believe that if from the get-go they had the resources that they needed, then we don't know what other type of effect that we could have had. It took time for not only the general community to believe in that. That's just how politics are. But in terms of the county party and state party, it took time for them to buy into that. And that then goes back to, if black women are the backbone of our party, then that means a lot. That means in terms of field workers, that means in terms of how you're marketing them, that means that when you have a seat at the table, you can't have a fixed menu. So when we had those black women that were running, we couldn't fix the situation and require them to only run a certain way. That also means that when we're having committees that will be formed, because they're going to be formed in the near future, when we're selecting or when we are influencing who's going to run in each race, we have to be on those committees. So I'm not going to jump too far ahead, but I think we want to be careful to say that 19 of those women were recruited.
Oh, I'm not saying that all 19 were recruited. I'm just saying I think we had a record number of African American women running, which I think is an accomplishment in itself. It also simultaneously resulted in a record number of them actually being elected, which is a huge deal. My argument isn't that. My argument is there should have been more. My argument is that they should have been in higher positions. My argument is that we should have had a county treasurer candidate. Crow and I talked about this. We had people essentially ceding certain seats for no apparent reason. So, and so I would argue that there should have been more and that there were opportunities there. That said, and the reason that's more, because ballot position matters. If you look at the voter rolls and you look at who voted and you look at the precinct by precinct breakdown, you know that there was not as much differentiation between some of these seats as you would have expected, right? That's one of the reasons why, and I know, and again, I don't want to harp on the county judge thing, is that you can see the hard break where people shifted and then came back to voting Democratic for everything else. So that's just there. That's a reality. It's a mathematical reality. But I guess what I'm saying is one of the reasons I would argue that we didn't have a greater or better performance among African Americans in terms of turnout is that we didn't have a higher profile enough candidate, and I think that would have been really beneficial. And I think that makes a big difference.
So let me say this. I wrote a piece.
And we have questions, so we should probably take some of these questions.
Let me just say this, then we'll take your question, because I wrote a piece, and I went and talked to the Beto folks, and they did a little better job after that. But my argument to them was, after we finished this cycle, with the statewide nomination process, we did not have a high profile. But I said it was okay. We had enough African American candidates running across the state at the local level. We also had, unbelievably, an African American woman on the ballot for Congress in East Texas, Shirley McKellar. We also had an African American woman running from Galveston down to Jefferson County and Beaumont. We actually lost Jefferson County on election night. And the argument I made to Beto, the state party folks, is you have to spend money to lift up these black Democratic candidates, because they will drive additional turnout for you, even if the candidate doesn't win office. I don't think, because the mindset wasn't there in the party, that they really understood, maybe because they hadn't done it in so long, we hadn't seen a Lloyd Benson figure in the state in so long, they really didn't know how to run a coordinated campaign.
And I also would like to add that, and you have to have early dollars, not late dollars.
And the last point,
early dollars.
The last point I'll make on this: Chris Hollins, who's the vice chair, young, sharp African American, Yale Law School, McKinsey and Company, future talent, did an analysis that goes in part to your point to make this observation. You still have votes in the box if you had turned out black folks. And I think it was something like this: across the 15 or 20 largest counties in the state, if you had increased turnout by 3% more, Beto would have been the United States Senator from Texas. And that 3% more were African American voters that you left in the can, because love Beto. But Beto ran a campaign in large part that he wasn't a Democrat, and he really didn't want to be affiliated with the Democratic Party, and he really didn't want to be affiliated with the other Democratic candidates. He was running by himself to be elected to United States Senator, and in large part, notwithstanding whatever Beto effect there was, the differential you left in the boxes made a big difference. When the whole theory of the gubernatorial candidate, I've been in Democratic Party politics long enough to have seen a Hispanic candidate with a whole lot more money than Lupe Valdez run for governor as a Democrat. And I wasn't sure the theory of we needed a Hispanic candidate for governor, but if that was the theory, you couldn't put her on the ballot and not come through with a bunch of money for her. And you could not put her on the ballot, an African-American woman, and not come through with a bunch of money for her, so that if the theory was Beto was the white guy / Hispanic, but we had a woman who was Hispanic and we were going to get women, and we had the white guy at lieutenant governor, and we had the white guy at attorney general, and we had the black woman at controller, and we were going to put together the coalition, then it's hard to put together the coalition when you never saw a picture of the statewide ticket together. You never saw a picture of the entire, what would be the Texas Democratic congressional delegation being led by Beto. And you never saw a picture of what a Democratic legislature would look like. You never saw a commercial ran that said, if you give Democrats control of Texas, here's what you will get. Yeah, you get lucky with a lot of one-off candidate, and you get a personality in Beto, but personality doesn't trump infrastructure. So you ended up with Abbott with a boatload of money out there spending money to try to help his candidates get it.
Right, but I mean, this is an example of what I'm talking about, right? This is this is my LeBron James analogy to playing the Golden State Warriors. You had 30 years, you had a generation of infrastructure in the Republican Party statewide. You had essentially nothing in the Texas Democratic Party. We haven't had a Bible race candidate since John Sharp in 2002. That was the last time we tried to a coordinated effort. Remember, the Texas Democratic Party didn't want Beto O'Rourke, they wanted Julian Castro. They didn't want Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke, as you said, came out of literally nowhere. Right? So let's be clear about that. But to your large point, and here's what I'm talking about. If you look at the African American turnout in Dallas County, driven by Colin Allred, and you take that number and you put it to the other 18 counties, Beto O'Rourke wins. The problem is there's no Colin Allred in the other 18 counties.
They are. You just got to find them.
Well, he's got to run. He wasn't on the ballot. That's my point. There was no Colin Allred on the ballot, and that's what the issue is. That's one of the reasons I'm fundamentally saying you need to have him running in these races. So I agree with you.
But let's say this.
Because they are there.
Let's take the reality. You had Adrian Bell
Yeah. Good.
running
Good point.
in the 14th, I believe it is.
Right.
And no Democratic donors would give her any money, give her infrastructure. Colin Allred, and this is a good thing, when you are a IT candidate and the conspiracy is with you, you raise a boatload of money.
Right.
If Colin Allred had been treated like Adrian Bell in the 14th, he wouldn't be in Congress.
That's right.
He looked like Beto O'Rourke. He was raising money hand over fist beyond any amount he would need. In politics, once you buy X number of gross rating points on TV, every point you buy above that is a waste because it doesn't make a difference. So nobody said, hey, we have fully funded Lizzie, we have fully funded Colin.
Nobody fully funds anything in politics. You know that.
Let's shift some of that money and let's go help Shirley McKellar in the 1st Congressional District in East Texas, and let's go help Adrian Bell over in the 14th. If Adrian Bell had gotten 5 more points, Beto O'Rourke would be a United States Senator. If Shirley McKellar in East Texas, you think black people don't live inside the 610 loop, black people don't even live in Harris County, black people live in East Texas. They live in East Texas.
That's right.
If you would have drove up that turnout, Beto O'Rourke would be the United States Senator. That's the big difference. That's all I think I'm trying to make.
I'll pick on him because he's here. You can,
We've got a couple of, I
you
see
can
we
make-
got some,
you
we
can
got
make-
some hands.
Okay, so I'm sorry. You had
Two
your hand
things
up
I
for a
did.
while.
Okay, I'm gonna get to Professor McShane in just a second. One thing I want to say when we talk about candidate quality, especially as I get some backup here in the room, thank you. We looked at the coverage of the 17 new two sittings, so 19 women. Particularly, we're interested in the 17 African American judges. We have to remember, 8 of them came from Thurgood. So we looked at coverage from the BBC. See, I knew I had me some backup. I needed an amen corner. We looked at coverage from the BBC. We looked at coverage from the Independent, the London Independent today. We looked at coverage all over the world. I don't hear anybody, so I'll be that person up here. Let me make sure and remind you guys, African Americans often go to historically black colleges and universities. Where is that encouragement there? Who's encouraging my students? I have 4 students in here who want to go to law school. 3 of them who want to be in public office. One of them is going to be the first black U.S. Republican senator from Texas. That'll be future Senator Joe. But trust me when I tell you, that's all right. But what I'm saying is, where's the nurturing? No, where's that part of the story? You know, African American candidates often come out of HBCUs. Let me speak 3 degrees in about what this school is doing. I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing when we're talking about, even through the party, I can't accept someone saying that these 17 candidates were encouraged to run. No, that's people like me standing up at the podium saying, you can run, you can run, you can run, Tori, you can run, Jelani, I got you. We got you, Jasmine, we have you. I'm not hearing anything from the party. I'm not hearing anything in the community about, let's talk about the group. Maybe they didn't go to Harvard. Maybe they did not go to Princeton, but we've got viable candidates. That's the message I'm not hearing. The HBCU message in this room, in this house, let's talk about where the next Barbara, where the next Mickey is coming from. They may be coming from an HBCU. They may not be an Ivy League candidate. Please make sure.
HBCUs, Ivy League as well.
They are.
Howard University. I'm just.
I
just have to go there.
I know, Dr. Braylor, you're not in question, but what I'm saying when we talk about encouragement, I don't think the traditional encouragement was there. I don't think your Thurgood candidates, as we called them, because that's what we call them, they're ours, right? They're ours. Did the Thurgood candidates get to sit down with the fat cats at the Greater Houston Partnership and talk about money? No. I didn't see those conversations. If they had them very quietly. So I do want to talk about, yes, they are. We're going to talk about the engines that drive these trains down these tracks. And somebody's got to be doing the hard work. It's much more comfortable to be sitting in, corporate America, my students know, explaining why things blow up. I'm really good at that. But somebody's got to be here saying, where is our next Barack coming from? It may be an HBCU. Where is our next Beto coming from? It may be an HBCU. So we're going to chew on that for a moment. We're going to digest that. I feel very strongly that we need to remember that when we say things like, well, they were encouraged to run. They were encouraged to run by probably people like me, people like that, people like us sitting here. So just let us not forget, we may have a Beto, we may have a Barack, we may have a Shirley, we may have an Adrian. We have an Adrian. So let's not forget, on our last slate, we had quite a few Thurgood candidates as well. So let me just put that shout out there. We had Thurgood candidates in El Paso County. We had Thurgood candidates in Jefferson County. We had Thurgood candidates in Nueces County. Please, I want to make sure when the BBC is covering it today, remember to say, and having a historically black law school in your city does a lot to give you the opportunity to field that many law degree candidates that go on to be judicial candidates, that go on to be, ladies and gentlemen, sitting members of the judiciary. I had to put that out there. Do we have anything that you got to get off your chest? And can I go to Professor McShane here, my esteemed colleague?
Good evening. So I want to make a point along with the HBCUs. You have Senator Kamala Harris, a Howard graduate. You have Andrew Gillum, a graduate of Florida A&M. You
Bam.
have Stacey Abrams, a graduate of Spelman College. You have Keisha Lane Spottles, mayor of Atlanta, graduate of FAMU. So HBCUs are showing up and showing out. Yes, Thurgood ran a spectacular campaign this midterm. One of the main strategists on that campaign, an Atlanta resident, is a Thurgood graduate in the form of Meredith Lilly.
Correct.
So we are out here doing the work as HBCU grads. But let me get to the point, back to what the panel spoke about earlier. The money, the get out the vote money was not there for these African American candidates. When they won their primaries, the money should have been instant. Because now we have a chance. We have a seat at the table. Now let's get to the meat. Let's get to the plate. And the Democratic Party failed those candidates time and time again. We saw an article hit the New York Times, and I know somebody's gonna get mad at me for saying it, but I speak truth to power. An article hit the New York Times this past week, speaking about the 19 from Harris County.
Is there a microphone?
They were not funded properly. Yeah, Dr.
We need a
Okay,
microphone.
we have an audience mic here. We're gonna have.
I asked him where was it. He texted me. Is it on?
Oh, yeah, I got that.
That was going to be our audience mic, because you've heard enough from us. We want to respond to some of the things you guys have to say as well. Professor McShay.
So back to the money not being there, we had a get out the vote campaign here in Harris County that was funded but did not fund candidates, local candidates. It funded promoters to get celebrities, right? But you got to fund the candidates, because once they get the momentum, they already have the relationships. They'll bring out the lawyers because, the celebrities, because they went to school with a lot of them. They went to school with a Slim Thug. They went to school with a little Kiki. They're going to come out anyway because they see someone who looks like them, someone that they already know. So why are you funding promoters to go get celebrities when you could be funding the campaigns themselves? So that's one point. So we spoke about the Beto effect. The Beto effect, it is what it is. But Lena was in a primary, right?
No.
She wasn't? She ran unopposed. But that still means we knew we had a candidate facing Ed Emmett in the fall. But if she ran unopposed, why didn't the party put someone who they feel was more suitable to run? Because we do select candidates sometimes.
They did. They tried. And nobody wanted to run.
I don't know. Maybe they need to look a little bit further.
I did.
Because there are other people in this community who never get reached, who are doing the work in this community. Educators, lawyers, there are people doing the work. So that's one thing. Lupe beat Andrew White, right? She beat him. Why wasn't money put behind her? Why did that happen?
I got a lot of questions about Lupe, but that would be a whole nother panel about that campaign.
Since we're going to talk about national, let's look at what's going on in Mississippi. But before I get there, last week when the numbers were coming in on NBC, you had Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie speaking with Lindsey Graham. And Lindsey Graham, they asked him about Ted Cruz, was he worried? He said no. He paused for a long time. He said, I'm not worried, I'm concerned. And he started talking about socialism in Texas, the new buzzword that they're going to associate with Texas. But what I saw about Lindsey Graham was that he's afraid. What's happening in Texas is happening in other states. Texas is not so red anymore, and they know that. But we got to put the funding to it. And also, when you look at Mississippi, you got Mike Espy looking to become a senator in 2 weeks for the state of Mississippi. No state is more red and racist than Mississippi. So what we have to do, and I'm speaking as a member of the Democratic Party, what we have to do is we've got to fund candidates. We can't just wait till the momentum, and now because they're a trending topic because of what the seated senator did in Mississippi this weekend. So now my ESP is a trending topic. We can't wait until the last minute to get behind them. We have to get behind them once they have the opportunity to be the chosen candidate. And that's the biggest struggle with the Democratic Party. They're not funding the candidates. You either fund them, we start some candidate schools like Yale has,
I
but
see
we
a
have to
couple
do the
of,
work.
I don't want to.
I'm gonna sit down. I just had to say
I don't want
that.
to give you the Oscar wrap it up again, but I know we had a couple of student questions too, and I think we had a gentleman right there. A gentleman wanted to say something.
Donato.
I-
I want to say a couple of things. The
Uncle
first
Jim.
thing is that
Mr.
there's a
Donato.
guy in this room who should have been county judge. He
I would-
ran citywide and won in every district.
I was going to say that. You literally.
Say it.
$500 budget and 7,000 employees, and I begged him to run and he wouldn't run. He knows who he is. Raise your hand over there.
Raise your hand there,
Say it.
Chief.
I have no idea who should be part of it.
You're right. Thank you, Brother Bradford. Okay. Should have been county judge. But let me tell you about raising money. I belong to the Cross the Track PAC. We gave over $80,000 this election cycle. We are 21 black business people. We also, I'm not counting the money we raised because we had 9 fundraisers. My son and I, the Donato group, gave $23,000. We give money.
That's
It just aren't enough people like us. The university, I love you to have this rah-rah about how great HBUs are.
I'm gonna keep it up. I'm cheerleading all
But
day.
you see, that's the wrong issue.
All day.
The issue is that this school should be giving leadership to programs for people out here who are be running for office. It's okay to graduate them, but nobody's out here putting together the kind of think tank that these guys should put together and encourage people to come up with numbers and find ways to raise money. We don't do that. Okay, we just don't do that. Now, you all are talking about the election. I came to hear that. But right now, I'm working to make sure we have lawyers who make sure all those 19 judges file their reports on time. We also have people who do social media to make sure when they get attacked on Facebook, we're there to respond. We're also working now for the 20 election, and we're worried about no straight ticket. We're trying to put together committee groups now to teach that in our community. So this election is great. It's over. We ought to understand why it was done. There's so much more to be done.
Donato, I'd like to respond, and so thank you very much for what you are doing, and other groups that are doing have similar initiatives. I think that right there is important to acknowledge that there are other groups on the ground that are doing things, whether they're in conjunction with the party or they're not. And
They're not.
Be
clear.
Yes. So that's my point. I think we have to look at the importance of that and the role that it played in this election. If we don't do that, we won't be wise in terms of developing a vision and a plan to move forward that is inclusive before candidates before candidates become candidates, and it won't be inclusive in terms of putting a plan to ensure that not only they win, but they sustain those seats.
Hey,
Okay.
So let me just touch on a couple of things, because I can only speak for the things I know about. So about 2 years ago, the School of Public Affairs went to the Board of Regents, and we passed a resolution authorizing the establishment of a project focused on the 2020 census and redistricting. Before the last city council cycle, we ran a campaign schools for candidates 2 or 3 years ago. We're planning to do that again. A number of folks who grew out of the TSU professorate went out and helped a group of black women form a Black Women PAC. We helped empower a group of younger people to take leadership in local political organizations. We've encouraged established and non-established individuals, older and younger, to go run for public office. So with the reach and scope and resources we have tried to help make that difference. I agree with you, Donato, that more people have to start doing that, and one of the things I've tried to encourage people to understand you just got to start where you are with what you have and go from there. Everybody wants to wait till, a lot of people, let me not say everybody, want to wait till they have $1 million before they start getting political active, or before they run, or before they donate. Giving $5 when you can, as often as you can, makes a big difference for a candidate. You can start a PAC. You don't have to be somebody else. I mean, it's literally just filing a piece of paper. You got to build a social media infrastructure. But I can tell you what Carol G. Robinson is focused on. We got to go elect. You want a bench? You have to go elect black city council member candidates across the state of Texas. You got to go elect school board members across the Texas. They run in 19. You got to go run, just in Harris County, you have 2,000 MUDs. They issue bonds and have economic impact on a lot of folks out in the unincorporated area. You got to go help elect people to MUD boards out there in these other special districts. So the plan for the political science department is 19, we're going to try to help educate, prepare candidates to run. We're trying to help them prepare the infrastructure of people who can help candidates run. We're trying to help prepare and grow a pool of people who can help elected officials govern. And at the same time, everybody's talking about winning the House back in 2020 and redistricting in 2021, but not that many people are out there talking about this fact. If you don't count people in 20, they don't count for purposes of redistricting the state.
Right.
So we're focused on helping communities across the state get organized. We developed the infrastructure at the university where we have the software, and have had 3 training sessions to teach our students how to use the technology to draw the maps. We have put together a group of lawyers to be available for locally elected officials who want help to draw the map, but not only draw the map, draw the districts, but to defend them in the litigation that will come, because all these people we are electing in 16, 18, and 20, you're going to have to hold on to them, and there will be places that you have to redraw. I'm like you. I try to be a little foresighted. To me, I'm already trying to work on folk that I think you could pick up a 3rd seat on the county commissioner's court. And that means you got to go groom some candidates, start lining up their money, and lining up a campaign staff for them. So a lot of people are going to be focused on city council, and that's going to be good, a mayor's election. But I'm looking at another county commissioner.
Just real quick, one thing I...
We'll get back to you, Mr. Donato, in just one moment. We will, and I do appreciate those comments. But I do want to get to 2 really focused things that we were talking about in terms of the midterm election. And as my students know, I love numbers, so I'm going to get back to a couple of numbers here. Let's talk about the state ledge. What does the midterm election tell us about what could possibly happen in this Texas legislative session? What's going to happen in January? In 2009, with the wave that was on the Obama ticket coming down the ballot, we saw for probably the first time in quite some time in the ledge, a 76 Republican majority, 76-seat Republican majority, very slim majority in the House, to 74 Democratic majority. And that was really a lot of that was the presidential year Obama bounce. This midterm wasn't that much of a bounce, but it was certainly a little bit of a ripple. What do we see for the state legislature coming up in January? Because it's going to be here in minutes. We just had the Black Legislative Caucus golf tournament, so it's literally, we're looking within weeks of starting our state legislatures. We know every other year is when we write the checks for the state. What do we see the midterm elections? What does it tell us about what the ledge could look like?
Yeah, let me just correct you on one thing. We picked up 12 House seats. That's the biggest growth we've ever had in Texas. That was a massive increase. We picked up 2 state Senate seats.
No, I got the numbers.
Yeah.
Again, I love numbers.
So,
it's not a correction. I got it. But go ahead.
Yeah. But I just want to be clear, because I don't want anyone to think otherwise. That was a huge and unexpected boost. Most people have thought there were only 5 to 7 potentially competitive seats. Picking up 12. We changed the dynamics of the speaker race. The speaker race is essentially over. Dennis Bonnen is going to be the new Texas House Speaker, who the possibility was going to be a much more conservative speaker. Bonnen is considered sort of certainly a conservative, but and he's considered much more of a consensus candidate. That's why he had 109, 110 people signed on. Many Democrats, in fact, have signed on with it. You may see once again Democratic committee chairs, which will be a big change, going back to the way it used to be. Likely some of the socially contentious issues that we saw in previous sessions, Bonnen, I think, will keep the tradition of what Strauss did, which is not allow them through. Number one priority for him is school finance reform. That's what he said he's going to do. The big issue for Bonnen and for others is that they're already looking ahead to 20. They want to maintain, because when you still have at least 9 to 10 seats where candidates lost by less than 5 points, and those seats can be flipped. And so if you only need essentially 8 seats now to take the majority, 8 or 9 seats rather. So that being what it is, this session is really set up to try to allow them to continue governing, to be preparing for 20 so that they can hold it on. For Democrats, it's about expanding their 67, getting up to 76, and then trying to control the redistricting process in some form or fashion.
And I said redistricting, as well as maybe we'll see some things that are addressed around voting.
So I think the big thing for the legislature, actually, where they're going to spend a lot of their time, is still Harvey.
It's all about trees.
They'll do public school finance. I don't really think they are that worried. It'll be center of the road in the House. The Senate will still be conservative, maybe not as much. The governor's got to figure out what he's going to do next, and a lot of that depends on whether or not Trump is or is not reelected, because I think he wants to be president. I think if you understand the legislative process, redistricting is probably not going to be done by the legislature. If the Republicans hold on to the Senate and lose the House, you're really looking at the likelihood that we're going to a redistricting commission.
Yeah.
And so if you are somebody who is interested in what's going to happen with redistricting, folks need to start thinking about and drawing maps now, and you need to file them in this coming legislative session, so you put them on the record, so you start to build a record for litigation, because I don't think redistricting is going to be taken care of in the 2021 session. Second, I think we didn't do a good job of it. As progressives, Democrats, whatever the term, community empowers. There's a lot of data that came through this election cycle that if you're really interested in making sure you can count people in 2020, we have got to go collect up that data. We get a second test run in 2019 with local elections, then you get your last test run heading into the March primary, and then on April 1st, 2020, is Census Day. And if you don't count them, they don't count for purposes of your map.
Bradford has a, yeah, please.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chief?
Yeah, thank you, Conley. Well, government, people
And then Mr. Donato.
people need and want government to solve problems. And it's not happening. And whether you look at education, infrastructure, criminal justice reform, or environment, and recently even public safety issues. So let's look at future forecasts. And my 2 questions, quickly, going forward. The impact of the demise of straight ticket voting, talk about that. Secondarily, are we experiencing a cultural shift within the Democratic Party? I'll yield.
Well, let me talk about straight ticket real quickly. It's an entirely urban county problem. It's essentially not an issue in smaller counties. It's one of the reasons why I think the GOP moved to make the change, partially because Harris County, because large urban counties in Texas 70% of our what we vote for are judges, because we're apportioned by population. So one of the Harris County's had the longest ballot for actually the last 2 or 3 cycles. We had 92 this cycle in terms of people you actually vote for, not necessarily ballot proposition. So there's a real effect here. There's going to be an education process that's going to be needed. They're probably going to need double the machines. They're going to have to change the voting process. We're going to have maybe early vote longer. We're going to have to make the machines themselves simpler to use than the 15-year-old daisy wheel configuration that we use now. All that's going to have to come into play because you're going to have ballot drop-off. Normally, this last cycle, 75% of the voters voted straight ticket. So only 25% of the voters actually went through all the way down. Of that, Democrats had a 100,000 vote lead coming out of straight ticket. So, and that's been the case in urban counties for a while, about 65% vote straight ticket. So this was an increase on that. So going forward, they're going to have to make some deep structural changes at the governmental level. So that's where Commissioners Court's going to have to appropriate more resources for the county clerk to purchase new equipment. That's going to have to be done. The voter registration process by the voter registrar has to be streamlined and has to. We can't be unnecessarily putting people off the voting rolls. So we're going to have to finally have an early vote location at TSU and UH. We haven't had one. It's been like, we've never had one. We've been trying for 20 years. So they're going to have to do things that are going to get more people engaged in the process and give them opportunities, because it's going to be something that has to be managed over time, unless, of course, they go back and change their mind, which I don't think they're going to do.
So candidates are going to have to figure out how to create, I think this is where you're going with the question, higher visibility, or figure out how to get a coalition when you can't get high visibility because you don't have sufficient funds. And even if you had the money, you're going to have to better time it, because 50 pieces of mail, you're indistinguishable. So folks who are going to be on the 2020 ballot, especially the judicial candidates, have got to start giving serious consideration to how they will run their campaign. And do we see more, let's call them centrist, moderate candidate on the theory that maybe it's the center? I'm not sure, because I think right now, if you have a strong, active, energized base, they'll go find you on the ballot. So people are going to have to pick one of those two models. We'll know after 2020 which one works. Will you see candidates that are Republican trying to cross over more into the black community to drive down the margin, i.e. pick up more African-American votes, because if they can get to 10, 15% and hold Republicans in a countywide race, they're more likely to win now? Do you see the African-American candidates say this, hey, if we can hold the black base and do a little better incrementally with Hispanics and Asian and whatever whites we get, we'll win? That's the two tests that's going to happen. Governance is going to be a big issue. I think Jay touched on some of it, because now you're going to really have to govern with foresight. But let me pick it up a little broader and bigger, and I'll use the legislature as an example. It does not seem to me that Democratic members of the legislature know what Democratic leadership of state government in Texas should look like. And if the Democratic members of the legislature don't articulate what Democratic governance looks like in the state, it's going to be hard to convince folks in a non-straight ticket environment that they should rally to go elect a bunch of Democrats. And so there's going to have to be some conversation among Democratic House members and Democratic senators and people who think they want to run again in 20 for Cornyn's seat and 2022 for the statewide offices. They're going to actually literally have to be more specific from a policy point of view about what a Democratic Texas looks like.
What that stands for. I did want to, you mentioned it just a hot minute, Professor Robinson, and my last thing that I wanted us to make sure to touch on in terms of the midterm election was Harvey. Did it have an effect? Did we not have an effect? what do we think Harvey does to help shape? You mentioned it a little bit in the sense of the ledge. Was there a shift, do we think, demographically, geographically, from the Harvey effect? Do we think that people are more inclined? Are they going to be looking at bond elections more closely? Or propositions? Any thoughts about that? Anybody? I'm just throwing it out there. Harvey as a...
I mean, Harvey, yeah, I mean, the county bond passed comfortably, the city Prop A, there's certainly linkages to that. The candidates that ran on it, that was a primary issue on how flood control was managed in the CD7 race. Most of the ads that Lizzie Fletcher used were essentially against Culberson on that. That was cited as the reason why he lost key endorsements. So I think it certainly played a factor.
Okay.
It shifted some folks. I think part of that is what happened down along the Gulf Coast, the Golden Triangle area, that you saw Jefferson County go Republican. You had a lot of displaced African Americans down there that have not come back yet.
Any thoughts about Prop B, I'm sorry, and secondarily, any thoughts? We had a mayor that was against a proposition on a ballot, and similarly, people thought was interesting. We had a governor campaign actively against members of his own party that he felt did not carry out his agenda. How did that work out? How do we see that? How do we see that shape out when in fact the elected officials more closely shape the agenda, proposition-wise or candidate-wise? If any of you guys want to jump in.
On Prop B, that was always a bad decision for the mayor to take. I didn't understand from a structural perspective. I mean, people like firefighters, and that was going to pass. It was a difficult proposition. I mean, he may have been able to make the financial argument, but I think fundamentally he didn't do a very good job of explaining why police and fire should be paid the same. And that said, I think it was always going to happen. I think the mayor lost an opportunity. This would have been the election for him to put up a public safety exception to Rev Cap and use this as a justification. Chief and I have talked about that before. But that didn't happen. And as far as the governor, the governor fundamentally thought, as many Republicans did, that this was going to be a standard Texas primary, where it's all in the primary, and the general election didn't matter. The more conservative parts of the Republican Party, the Empower Texas folks, they got crushed this election cycle. And so in that sense, in an ironic sort of way, the governor may have inadvertently created a better scenario for himself to be able to govern in his more center-right moderation that we all thought he would be.
And we wonder how that's
Let me say this.
go ahead.
I don't think Abbott is going to be center-right. Now, I don't know what comes through the Senate and the House. It probably is a little bit more moderate, but let's say this. In Texas, you got a bunch of what I'm going to call base issues. Basic thing the legislature has to take care of. They have to pass a budget. They're going to try to deal with school finance. They will deal with healthcare issue. U of H will probably get a medical school. But there's just boring.
No,
they'll get funding for it. They don't have funding for it. They'll get boring. There's a list of boring operational stuff. Then you have, let's just ignore all the local and consent stuff. Then you'll have a few issues that could be controversial. The governor has already laid out some pretty conservative things in his agenda going in. Okay, all that said, here's what I thought would have been really interesting. If on election night, when you realized that you were going to pick up 12 seats as Democrats, the Democrats would have been unified enough to go say to Sarah Davis, can you find a handful of Republicans and we would make you the Speaker of the House? But that's bravery by both sides. That's how you end up with Bonner, where the 67 folks decided it was different interests rather than sending a different kind of message, and maybe she wouldn't have wanted to do it. But I think that's the kind of stuff Democrats are going to have to think about. On the city elections, I try to think of these things in a bigger context. Here's what happened. And let me make a disclaimer. I ran for controller and I made a different argument. My argument goes back to one of the underlying points of Chief Bradford. Government has not been modernized in a long time, whether it's at the local or state level. We're still running 18th century government in the 21st, headed to the 22nd century. Some of it Jade touched on, because I'm sure nobody has thought about what the budget is going to be for new machines, new locations, etc., and they're going to have to go through that. But we had this old school argument where everybody said the city's finances are a problem because of pension, and you went to the legislature and you got pension reform and you told us you fixed the problem. Then every year since, you have continued to say, I have a budget problem. Then Proposition B gets on the ballot, and the corollary argument is, the primary argument is, I have a budget problem. So you essentially take away, if you look at what happened when the mayor came out of the legislature last session and fixed the pension issue, his numbers were riding high. He turns around and within 2 years, he's saying his budget is still a problem, and it's still the same group of people that's causing him a budget problem. So you've essentially taken away from yourself the argument that you were somebody who could fix the city's financial problems. And the voters go, I believe, in part, I don't really understand what you're telling me anymore, because you told me you fixed the problem, and you keep telling me there's a problem. And maybe he didn't do a good argument, but I don't think the argument he should have been making is that it's a budget problem, one. Two, yeah, maybe he should have put RevCap along with it, but I think it would have been a better scenario from the very beginning to engage Houston in a conversation about modernizing city government from stem to stern. And once you started that conversation, then fixing the fire department, even the police department. Let's say this. The police department has gotten a free ride, and I'm a friend of the police officers. I believe in protecting our neighborhoods. I believe in holding the police accountable for misbehavior in the community. But the police department is the biggest part of the city budget, and they have had the most technology, and we have had no return in terms of efficiency and downward driving of criminal statistics and incidents across the board. And so it's really hard when you are making an argument against one city department and not really speaking to people who now live in a world where they call Uber and Uber shows up and they walk out the door, they're at home and they push a button and their groceries slow up, and they have such a hard time interacting with city government. I think you're going to have a different kind of conversation, and it may not happen in 2019 election, but I think sooner or later somebody's going to come along and run for city government and really take the conversation about Houston wants to be an innovative city to an inward conversation. If we're going to be an innovative city, it can't be just because we really built the Sears building and Rice University puts up some money, is that we have the most modern, technologically advanced and efficient government, and we look like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Twitter. We have that kind of modern government.
I hope that I add to that just a simple political science lesson. This is me from the cheap seats. Never bet against firefighters. They are excellent campaigners, future candidates. They're great campaigners. They're great door knockers. People will open their door for a fireman if they won't open the door for anybody else. Little old ladies love them. Men love them. Little kids love them. So never bet against firefighters when they're campaigning hard. Great campaigners. Oh, okay. And I was hoping that we can hear from one of our students. I know time is short. We're trying to wrap up. Do we have a current enrolled student right now that we could hear from? I know she's been waiting right here. If you could pass it on, we're going to pass it back.
She's applying for JI.
Hi, my name is Farrelly Carrier. I'm a currently enrolled student of the EMBA program and a JD candidate across the parking lot. So I'm going to be somebody's candidate one day.
Absolutely.
But going back to what was said earlier and what the chiefs touched on, my concern is in 2020, the momentum that has started with the Democratic Party and the results that we've seen from this recent midterm, is it sustainable for 2020? How are we going to get these voting, how are we going to actually get people to go down the ballot and know their candidates without straight party voting? And how is that even going to roll out? Do y'all think that the Democrats can keep the power that they've earned this election cycle in 2020 is my question.
Yeah, I mean, just very simply, I think the answer is yes. So presidential cycle elections, the numbers tick up even more than midterms. That's what made this election kind of extraordinary, is just the total votes were much higher than you normally expect. I think you have to go through and make those corrections to make the voting machines work. Otherwise, it's really difficult and challenging in urban Texas because of the way the ballots are constructed. I'm not sure if the legislature is going to go in and try. There's been some talk about trying to decouple judicial races. The one thing to probably remember is there are no Republican judges anymore after this cycle. And so the candidates that will be up this cycle, that will be up in 20, are ones that were elected in 16 and then in 12 and then 8. Right. And so that's really what we're looking at. That's the universe of candidates that we're looking at. So many of them are going to be, it's one of those where we're playing defense. Democrats are playing defense, and if not, there'll be open seats. The challenge for judicial candidates has always been, you are barred from campaigning the way a traditional candidate would. You can't just say anything about your opponent. There are very limited things based on the judicial canon of ethics. But we'll have a lot of countywide races up. The county attorney will be up. The district attorney will be up, and so you've got other races out there. Kroll alluded to the fact we're going to have a commissioner's court seat up, in addition to a presidential election, and so that's going to drive out turnout. I don't see there's anything just based on trend lines, because I think we've reached sort of a demographic and political tipping point where that the ballots. The interesting thing to me will be not so much the general election, but the primary battles in 2020, because what's going to happen is, much like the Republicans had in the previous time, everything's going to be settled in some ways at the primary level. And so we're going to see a lot more contested races, and that's where I think access for different candidates in it, we'll probably see multiple candidates competing for seats at the primary level.
So I'll go and then you can close us out.
Okay, I think she wanted to get a quick question in. I'm sorry, Carla, I'm sorry. Dr. Braley, I didn't see you, were you leaning in? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, Carol was good, but I mean, real quick, I think training is essential. I think, and training going into the communities to do that. Primary elections are going to be very important, and I think that's why, excuse me, it's even more important that candidates and current elected officials are not only focusing on campaigning, but building programs and relationships in their current offices, because you can do things outside of campaign season that allows you to remain visible and relevant. And so I think that's extremely important. And I think the party, in terms of the counties, can also work with elected officials in that way. And I said training was one other thing, and I can't remember.
So about the momentum, sustainability in 2020, I think a lot of it is not going to turn on straight ticket. It's going to turn on a national environment. So you have one or two versions of the world. Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi figure out how to do deals, and if they figure out how to do deals, Donald Trump comes into the 2020 presidential election stronger than people give him credit for. If it's not that environment, so this morning I was looking at Politico, and there was a poll, a significant percentage above a majority were opposed to impeaching the president. So if folks perceive Democrats as overreacting on the House side, you may have an energized Republican base, and you have independents, split ticket, swing ticket, whatever you want to call them, in the old vernacular, voters move away from you. I believe America is a center country. Sometimes it shades center left, sometimes it shades center right, but it's really pretty much a center where the big bulk of folks are. So when you look at the polling data, it was like, I always look at where are the independent voters on things. And so what happens in Washington, whether people intend it or not, will have a big impact on the mood of the country and the mood of voters. Harris County should still be okay as a Democratic place, but what will Texas look like? Nobody really talks about it, but heck, we have a Senate race coming right back around the corner. Cornyn is on the ballot, assuming he runs, because I'm not sure John Cornyn runs for re-election. He's out of the leadership because of term limits. As I understand it, the family wants him to be more family time. And
Well, he announced
In his heart for
he
it, I
announced he's
agree.
running for re-election, but I'm with you.
yeah,
heart's not in
let's
it.
say this, politicians always say that till they can figure out that,
Right.
and that's not a bad thing, but we may have an open race, but even if we don't, John Cornyn in Texas is a weaker candidate than Ted Cruz.
From the audience, before we wrap up,
I was just gonna say,
Oh.
just to add on to your question, I feel like not having a straight ticket ballot.
is the microphone, do we have the microphone? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Not having a straight ticket ballot forces candidates to be more accessible, forces candidates to actually get out there and let people know what they're running about, what they have to say, and make sure people know who they are. I think that's a good thing, me personally.
No, it is a good thing. The challenge is just with judicial candidates, and that 75% of them, they just can't say anything. That's really the unfortunate
I think
thing.
it's very interesting that this millennial is telling us what they want, and that's what I said,
Access.
visibility, likability, and that's why we'll need those funds.
I like the same things
Because
too.
that costs more money, too, to be able to do that.
Well, let's say this,
We had a question right here, or a comment, a question.
I'm not a legal mind. I know a lot of you guys are here, just a local volunteer, but is there any way we could challenge the straight ticket like that with at this time? Like, because I know like they have, you know, I think it's like the
litigation.
Voting Rights Act, where we're one of those states where you can't just pass voting laws without, you know, approval if they get challenged, because we have a history of voter suppression. So is there any type of fight we can put up to say, you know, that this is another form of voter suppression because they, you know, they see that it's working? Or I don't know, I mean,
so there is ongoing litigation over the elimination of the straight ticket along that same theory. This is like a conversation around redistricting. The Supreme Court has said a number of things, i.e., we don't have proportional representation, and we have arguments. Democrats win 48% of the vote in a state. So if they won statewide 48, 45, they should have 48, 45% of the seats. But the Supreme Court says that's not the way it works. Just because you get 48% of the total vote doesn't mean you are constitutionally entitled to 48% of the seats. When they eliminated straight ticket, they eliminated for both Democrats and Republican.
Right.
So there's no distinction. They didn't do it because it was something they were doing against Democrats, because they did it away for Republicans. So that's the sweet spot, even with extreme partisan gerrymandering. African Americans vote so Democratic that we almost become, the statistics professor would say, we're a positive correlation. You don't have to say Democrat, you could just say, let's find where the black people are, and you can impact Democrat. And the court has not figured out what to do with those kind of situations, because in the past, all the case law was around folks were doing it to you because you were black. Now, they're doing it to you because you're a Democrat, and the court has never said doing things to political parties is unconstitutional.
Or because you're urban, which urban is the new black.
Well, yeah, and let me say this. It's a fascinating read for all the nerds out there in TV land and in the room. If you go and read the last Supreme Court case on extreme partisan gerrymandering, it was fascinating to me how Justice Kagan characterized the volume of race-based voting case law, and she characterized it not as race-based laws and decision to protect African Americans. She described it as urban versus rural.
That's right.
And when even what are the progressive judges start neutralizing it and taking race out the equation, even though they are trying to get to a point where they think it's beneficial to you, that's not acknowledging the real history of America, and not even the history of America, but in a lot of places, a lot of ongoing challenges that are being faced by folks in this country because of their race, whether they are black, Hispanic, Asian, Native Americans. The irony where on the Native reservations you have to have an address to register to vote, but the post office won't give you an individualized address.
Ask Prairie View about that. Prairie View students, having the issue of that. I mean, there are so many things that we have to do to engage, and it starts with conversations like this, right? It starts with panels like this. It starts with enough people that cared on a blustery, wintry night to come out and help us kind of talk about, discuss, analyze, and look at what was a fascinating midterm election. I've got to give some great thanks to my panel, outstanding panel. You guys have said, as they do in the vernacular of the Black church, you have blessed us, as they say, with some words today, blessed us with some testimony. And I really want to say I appreciate you guys coming out. Well, this is just the beginning. We're going to have more of these. You're going to get sick and tired of hearing us talk about these things, and that's the only way we're going to get it out there. That's the only way we're going to keep whatever it is. We care about the democratic, little d, the democratic process. As Barbara Jordan says, the Constitution may not have been written for us, but it's certainly been entrusted to us. So with that in mind, thank you everybody, and good night. That would be Dr. Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez is our, among many things, many hats he wears, not just an urban planner, but our tech guru as well. I thought you were never going to say anything. Thank you.
Testing. Okay. Tonight's event is always posted on YouTube. Testing. Tonight's event, you find it at BJML SPA on YouTube.